The lights blazed down on Wembley Stadium as 50,000 voices roared in unison, their collective energy crackling through the humid London air of July 1978. On stage, bathed in golden spotlights, stood a figure who had already become legend at just 32 years old. Freddie Mercury commanded the massive arena with the effortless grace of a conductor orchestrating a symphony, his voice soaring over the thunderous applause as Queen launched into another electrifying number. The crowd swayed as one living entity, arms raised toward their idol, completely surrendered to the magic unfolding before them. But then, in the middle of a song that had the entire stadium singing along, something extraordinary happened, something that would be talked about for decades to come. Without warning, without explanation, Freddie Mercury stopped singing. His powerful voice, which moments before had filled every corner of the vast venue, simply fell silent. The band, confused but trusting their frontman implicitly, gradually stopped playing as well. Roger Taylor's drums faded to nothing. John Deacon's bass line died away. Brian May's guitar fell quiet. 50,000 people who seconds earlier had been lost in musical euphoria found themselves in complete, bewildering silence. The sudden absence of sound was deafening, almost physical in its weight. Fans looked around at each other in confusion, whispered questions rippling through the crowd like stones thrown into still water. What was happening? Was this part of the show? Had something gone wrong with the equipment? From the cheap seats in the upper tiers to the expensive floor sections, every eye turned toward the stage where Freddie Mercury stood motionless at center stage. His usually animated presence had become statue still, his famous swagger replaced by an intensity that seemed to pierce through the darkness beyond the stage lights. His eyes, those expressive eyes that had captivated millions, were fixed on something specific in the crowd below, scanning the front rows with laser focus. The silence stretched on, becoming uncomfortable, then concerning. Security guards began moving, thinking perhaps there was a technical malfunction or some kind of emergency. Band members exchanged glances, unsure whether to resume playing or wait for their lead singer's cue. The massive video screens flanking the stage showed Freddie's face in close-up, his expression serious, almost stern, so different from the playful performer who had been entertaining them moments before. In the front rows, where the most devoted fans had camped out for hours to secure their spots closest to their hero, something was indeed wrong. The crush of bodies pressing forward, the inevitable surge that happens when thousands of people push toward a stage, had created a dangerous situation. Someone was in trouble, caught in the squeeze of excited fans who didn't realize their collective enthusiasm was putting a fellow concertgoer at risk. But while 50,000 people saw only a performer who had inexplicably stopped mid-song, Freddie Mercury saw something else entirely. His trained performer's eye, honed by years of reading crowds and understanding audience dynamics, had spotted the distress signal that no one else noticed. In that sea of faces, among the screaming fans and waving arms, he had identified a single person in need of help. This moment would demonstrate something profound about the man behind the legend, something that would elevate him from mere entertainer to something approaching sainthood in the eyes of his fans. The great showman, known for his theatrical flair and commanding stage presence, was about to show the world that behind all the glamour and spectacle lived a human being with an extraordinary capacity for compassion. What happened next would prove that Freddie Mercury didn't just perform for his audience. He genuinely cared about each and every person who came to see him perform. Years later, those who witnessed this moment would describe it as the instant they realized they weren't just watching a concert, they were in the presence of someone truly special. The silence that had fallen over Wembley Stadium wasn't just the absence of music, it was the prelude to a lesson in humanity that would resonate far beyond the final encore. In that hushed moment, with 50,000 people hanging on his every move, Freddie Mercury prepared to demonstrate exactly why he was destined to become not just the greatest performer of his generation, but one of the most beloved human beings in the history of popular music. The stage lights continued to blaze, casting long shadows across the massive venue, but all attention remained focused on the solitary figure at center stage who had just proven that sometimes the most powerful performance of all is knowing exactly when to stop performing altogether. The stage lights blazed across 50,000 faces, each one turned toward the figure commanding the platform with otherworldly magnetism. But in that moment, as Freddie Mercury held his microphone like a scepter before the roaring masses, something unprecedented was about to unfold. Something that would reveal the true measure of a man who transformed stages into cathedrals and audiences into congregations. This was 1978, and the world had never seen anything quite like what was about to happen. The crowd pressed forward like a living tide, bodies surging with the rhythm of Queen's thunderous performance. From his elevated perch, Freddie could see everything: the ecstatic faces, the raised fists, the dangerous compression forming near the barriers. Most performers would have continued, lost in their own musical euphoria, trusting security to handle the chaos below. But Freddie Mercury was not most performers. His keen eyes, those same eyes that could seduce camera lenses and pierce through the fourth wall of any venue, suddenly locked onto something troubling in the front rows. Someone was in distress. A fan, overwhelmed by the crushing weight of bodies behind them, was being pressed dangerously against the metal barriers. The situation was escalating rapidly, and in that split second, Freddie faced a choice that would define not just this performance, but his entire legacy as an artist who truly understood his responsibility to those who worshipped him. Without hesitation, without consultation with bandmates or security, Freddie Mercury did something that stunned everyone present. He stopped the music. In the middle of a song, at the peak of the crowd's frenzy, he raised his hand and brought one of the world's most powerful rock performances to a complete halt. The sudden silence was deafening, more dramatic than any crescendo he had ever orchestrated. What happened next would become the stuff of legend, though few would understand its full significance until years later. This was not merely a pause in a concert. This was a masterclass in leadership, compassion, and the true meaning of star power. This was the moment when 50,000 people learned that they were not just an audience to Freddie Mercury, they were individuals, each one seen, each one valued, each one worthy of his protection. The arena fell into an eerie quiet, broken only by the confused murmurs of fans trying to understand why their musical god had suddenly gone silent. Freddie stood motionless for what felt like an eternity, his presence so commanding that even without music, without movement, he held the complete attention of every soul in that vast space. The power he wielded in that moment was not the manufactured energy of amplifiers and spotlights, but something far more profound, the natural authority of a leader who understood that with great influence comes even greater responsibility. Then, with the same theatrical precision that marked every aspect of his artistry, Freddie Mercury began to speak. But this was not the playful banter typical of concert intermissions, nor the rehearsed patter designed to fill time between songs. This was something entirely different, the voice of authority cutting through chaos, the tone of a man who would not allow harm to come to those who trusted him with their evening, their emotions, their very safety. His voice, that instrument capable of operatic majesty and rock and roll rebellion, now served a purpose more noble than entertainment. It became a tool of salvation, a means of protection, a demonstration of care that transcended the typical relationship between performer and audience. What Freddie Mercury did next would prove that true greatness lies not in the ability to command attention, but in knowing when and how to use that attention for something greater than oneself. The massive crowd, still confused but utterly transfixed, waited for their leader to guide them. They had no idea they were about to witness a display of crowd control so masterful, so intuitive, so perfectly executed that it would redefine what it meant to be not just a performer, but a true commander of human hearts and souls. This was the moment Freddie Mercury proved that his greatest instrument was not his voice, but his understanding of the profound responsibility that comes with the power to move masses. Without hesitation, Freddie takes control of the massive crowd with nothing but his voice and presence. His finger extends toward the front row, pointing with the precision of a conductor identifying a single violin in a full orchestra. The gesture is both gentle and commanding, intimate yet visible to thousands. His voice cuts through the arena's acoustics with surgical clarity, reaching every corner of the venue without strain or effort. "Step back," he commands, and the words carry the weight of absolute authority, tempered by unmistakable care. There is no anger in his tone, no frustration at the interrupted performance. Instead, there is the voice of someone who sees a fellow human being in distress and will not rest until that person is safe. The crowd, so recently wild with musical ecstasy, now hangs on his every word with the reverence typically reserved for sacred moments. His authoritative yet caring tone cuts through the chaos like a lighthouse beam piercing fog. Each syllable is measured, deliberate, designed not to panic but to guide. He speaks to 50,000 people as if addressing a single troubled friend, his voice carrying both the power to command armies and the tenderness to comfort a child. This is leadership in its purest form, not domination but protection, not control for its own sake, but control in service of others. The fans watch in absolute awe as he orchestrates the entire arena like a conductor before his symphony. His hands move with the same graceful precision that guides them through musical crescendos, but now they direct human movement, creating space where there was crushing compression. He points, gestures, guides, and the crowd responds with a synchronization that seems almost supernatural. This is not mere crowd control, this is crowd choreography at the highest level. Every movement of his body communicates intention and care. When he motions for the back sections to step away from the barriers, his gesture encompasses thousands yet feels personal to each individual. When he indicates where pressure needs to be relieved, people understand not just what to do, but why it matters. He has transformed a potentially dangerous situation into a teachable moment about collective responsibility and human compassion. His unmatched command of any room he enters is never more evident than in this moment of crisis. Without security guards, without barriers, without any tools except his own presence and voice, he has managed to reorganize an entire arena full of people. The crowd moves according to his direction not because they must, but because they trust him completely. They understand that this man, who moments before was entertaining them, is now protecting them. The arena becomes his instrument, and every person within it a note he can orchestrate to create harmony instead of chaos. He demonstrates something that cannot be taught or manufactured, the natural ability to lead that comes from genuine care for others. This is not showmanship, this is shepherding. This is not performance, this is service. He proves that his greatest command is not over music or stage effects, but over the fundamental human desire to be guided by someone we trust completely. As order gradually returns to the crowd, as space opens around the distressed fan, as dangerous pressure transforms into manageable enthusiasm, Freddie continues to monitor every section of his vast audience. His eyes sweep the arena with the vigilance of a guardian, ensuring that his intervention has fully resolved the crisis. Only when he is completely satisfied that everyone is safe does he allow himself to return to what he was born to do: create magic through music. The spotlights blazed down on Wembley Stadium, 50,000 voices rising in anticipation as Queen prepared to deliver another legendary performance in the summer of 1978. Freddie Mercury stood at the microphone, resplendent in his white satin outfit, the crowd's energy washing over him like a tidal wave of pure electricity. This was his element, his kingdom, where he transformed from Maurice Farak Bulsara into the rock god who could command armies with a single gesture. But on this particular night, something would happen that would reveal the true measure of the man behind the magnificent performer. The opening chords of their hit songs had barely begun to echo through the stadium when Freddie's keen eyes, those dark orbs that missed nothing, caught sight of something troubling in the sea of humanity before him. Down in the front rows, pressed against the barriers by the surging crowd behind them, fans were being crushed. The excitement that should have been pure joy was transforming into something dangerous, something that could steal the very breath from those who had come to celebrate music and life. Most performers would have continued, trusting security to handle the situation while they maintained the show's momentum. After all, 50,000 people had paid to see Queen perform, and the machine of a major concert production doesn't stop easily. But Freddie Mercury was not most performers. In that moment, watching a young fan struggling for air in the front row, he made a decision that would echo through rock and roll history and demonstrate why he was truly the greatest performer who ever lived. Without hesitation, without consulting management or waiting for security protocols, Freddie raised his hand and brought the entire performance to a complete halt. The music died away, leaving only the confused murmur of 50,000 voices wondering what was happening. The mighty Queen, at the height of their powers, had stopped mid-song because their frontman had seen one person in distress among the multitude. "Stop, stop, stop," Freddie commanded, his voice carrying across the stadium with the same authority he used to deliver his soaring vocals. But this wasn't showmanship, this was humanity. There's someone down there who's being hurt, and we're not going to continue until they're safe. The crowd fell silent, thousands upon thousands of people suddenly understanding that something more important than entertainment was taking place. They were witnessing a master at work, not just as a performer, but as a human being who refused to let spectacle overshadow the safety and dignity of even a single fan. In the front rows, people began to step back, creating space, responding to Freddie's command with the same devotion they showed to his music. From the stage, Freddie coordinated with security personnel, pointing to the exact location where the fan was in distress, ensuring that help reached the right person. He wouldn't sing. Another note wouldn't continue the show that thousands had anticipated until he knew that one young person could breathe freely again. The entire production, worth thousands of pounds and involving dozens of crew members, waited as their frontman prioritized a single life over the machinery of entertainment. This wasn't the first time Freddie had stopped a show for fan safety, and it wouldn't be the last. Throughout Queen's career, he made it a practice to watch the crowd as intently as they watched him, understanding that the relationship between performer and audience was sacred, requiring mutual care and respect. He had learned early that true showmanship meant more than vocal gymnastics and theatrical gestures. It meant taking responsibility for every person who had chosen to spend their evening in his presence. As security reached the distressed fan and helped them to safety, providing space and assistance, Freddie remained vigilant, ensuring the situation was fully resolved before considering a return to the performance. The young person who had been struggling was given water, medical attention, and moved to a safer position where they could enjoy the show without risk. Only when Freddie was satisfied that everything possible had been done did he signal to his bandmates that they could resume. "Is everyone all right now?" he called out to the crowd, his voice carrying genuine concern rather than performative care. The response was thunderous. 50,000 voices united not just in excitement for the music to come, but in admiration for what they had just witnessed. They had seen their idol demonstrate that fame and talent came with responsibility, that true greatness meant protecting those who were vulnerable, even when doing so required personal sacrifice. When Queen finally resumed their performance, something had fundamentally changed in the relationship between the band and their audience. The music that followed wasn't just entertainment, it was a celebration of human connection, of the understanding that every person in that stadium mattered individually, not just as part of a faceless crowd. Freddie's voice soared with even greater power, knowing that everyone present could breathe freely and safely enjoy the magic they were creating together. The fan who had been in distress later wrote that the experience taught them more about leadership and compassion than any book or lecture ever could. They had been saved not by an anonymous security guard following protocol, but by a global superstar who noticed their struggle and refused to prioritize entertainment over human welfare. That young person went on to become a teacher, carrying forward the lesson that true authority means using your power to protect and uplift others, especially those who cannot protect themselves. Word of Freddie's actions that night spread throughout the music world, inspiring other performers to adopt similar practices of crowd monitoring and fanning safety. What had begun as one man's instinctive compassion became a model for how artists could responsibly wield their influence over large gatherings of people. Concert safety protocols evolved partly because Freddie Mercury had demonstrated that stopping a show for human welfare wasn't a sign of weakness or poor planning, but of strength and proper priorities. The reason Freddie's action that night shocked so many wasn't just that he stopped the show, but that he did so with such natural authority and genuine care that 50,000 people instantly understood and supported his decision. In a world where celebrities often seem disconnected from their audiences, viewing fans as revenue sources rather than individual human beings, Freddie's behavior represented something revolutionary: authentic connection between performer and audience based on mutual respect and shared humanity. That evening at Wembley became legendary not for the songs Queen performed, though those were magnificent, but for the moment when music stopped and humanity took center stage. Fans left the stadium knowing they had witnessed something more valuable than entertainment. They had seen leadership, compassion, and the proper use of influence in action. They had learned that true greatness isn't measured only by talent or success, but by how you treat others when you have the power to make a difference. Years later, as tributes poured in following Freddie's death, that night at Wembley was remembered alongside his greatest musical achievements. Fans spoke of feeling seen and valued, not just as members of an audience, but as individual human beings worthy of protection and care. They had experienced firsthand what it meant to be in the presence of someone who understood that with great talent comes great responsibility, and who never forgot that every face in the crowd represented a unique and valuable life. The young fan whose distress had stopped the show grew up to tell their own children about the night a rock star taught them that everyone matters, that true leadership means noticing when others are in trouble and acting to help them, regardless of personal cost. They learned that power should be used to protect the vulnerable, that success brings obligations to those who support you, and that authenticity means caring more about doing right than looking good. The stage lights blazed against the darkness of a November evening in 1978, casting their familiar golden glow across 50,000 faces pressed together in electric anticipation. At 32 years old, Freddie Mercury stood at the absolute pinnacle of his powers, his voice a weapon of pure emotion, his presence a force that could bend reality itself. Queen had conquered America, stormed through Europe, and on this night they were delivering another masterpiece of rock and roll theater. The crowd surged with each note, each gesture, each perfectly timed theatrical flourish that had made Mercury the most captivating performer of his generation. But in the midst of this carefully orchestrated chaos, something would happen that no amount of rehearsal could have prepared him for, something that would reveal the extraordinary human being behind the legend. The opening chords of their set had already sent shockwaves through the venue, and Mercury was in his element, prowling the stage like a caged panther finally set free. His white jumpsuit caught the lights as he moved, his voice soaring over the thunderous roar of Brian May's guitar and the pounding rhythm section that had become Queen's signature sound. This was what 50,000 people had come to witness, this transcendent moment when four musicians from London transformed into something larger than life, when ordinary mortals became gods of rock and roll. Mercury's eyes swept across the sea of faces before him, each one illuminated by the stage lights, each one part of the collective energy that fueled his performance. But as the first song reached its crescendo, something in that sea of humanity caught his attention. In the front rows, where the most devoted fans pressed against the barriers, where the energy was most intense and the crowd most tightly packed, Mercury's trained eye detected a disturbance. Years of performing had taught him to read audiences like a conductor reads an orchestra, to sense the subtle shifts in energy and mood that could make or break a performance. What he saw in that moment would have been invisible to most performers, lost in the overwhelming spectacle of lights and sound and adoration. But Mercury saw everything, felt everything, and what he witnessed made him stop mid-verse. There, crushed against the front barrier, a young fan was struggling to breathe. The press of bodies had become too intense, the collective surge of 50,000 people creating a dangerous compression at the very front of the venue. The fan's face showed distress, panic beginning to set in as the weight of the crowd threatened to overwhelm them completely. Most performers would have continued the show, trusting security to handle whatever issues arose in the audience. After all, the show must go on, and 50,000 people had paid good money to see Queen deliver their legendary performance. But Freddie Mercury was not most performers. Without hesitation, without a moment's consideration for the momentum of the show or the expectations of the crowd, Mercury stopped singing. He raised his hand, and the music ground to a halt. 50,000 voices fell silent in confusion as the man they had come to worship abandoned his performance mid-song. The sudden quiet was deafening, more shocking than any explosion of sound could have been. Security personnel looked around in bewilderment, band members exchanged glances of concern, and the audience held its collective breath, unsure whether this was part of the show or something far more serious. Mercury walked to the edge of the stage, his presence commanding absolute attention even without the support of music or theatrical lighting effects. His voice, now speaking rather than singing, carried clearly through the venue's sound system as he addressed the crowd directly. The authority in his tone was unmistakable, the concern genuine and immediate. He had seen what needed to be seen, and he was going to act on it, regardless of the cost to the evening's entertainment. This was the moment when 50,000 people would witness something they had never seen before and would never forget. The moment when a rock star revealed himself to be something far more precious, a human being who truly cared about the welfare of every single person in his audience. The crisis in the front row was resolved swiftly once Mercury had drawn attention to it. Security personnel moved in, the crowd was asked to step back, and the endangered fan was given space to breathe and recover. The entire intervention took only minutes, but those minutes represented something profound in the relationship between performer and audience. Here was a man at the height of his fame and power, someone who could have justifiably been consumed by his own performance and the adulation of the masses, yet he had remained vigilantly aware of the individuals in his care. For that is what Mercury understood better than most, that an audience was not a faceless mass, but a collection of individual human beings, each deserving of his attention and protection. But what happened next would prove even more remarkable than the initial intervention. As the immediate crisis passed and the fan was safely attended to, Mercury did not simply restart the show as if nothing had happened. Instead, he remained at the edge of the stage, his eyes sweeping across the crowd, making contact with faces throughout the venue. The silence stretched on, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of a teacher preparing to deliver an important lesson, of a leader taking a moment to ensure his message would be clearly understood. Mercury understood instinctively that this moment of crisis had created an opportunity, a chance to connect with his audience on a level deeper than any song could reach. When he finally spoke again, his words carried the weight of absolute sincerity. He spoke about the importance of looking out for one another, about the responsibility that came with being part of something larger than oneself. He reminded the crowd that they were not just 50,000 individuals who happened to be in the same place, but a community bound together by their shared love of music and their mutual humanity. His voice, that incredible instrument that could soar to operatic heights or rumble with rock and roll power, now carried a gentleness that revealed the depth of his character. This was not the theatrical Freddie Mercury delivering a carefully rehearsed monologue, but the real man speaking from his heart about what truly mattered. The minutes ticked by as Mercury continued to address his audience, sacrificing precious time from a performance that had been months in the planning. From a purely commercial perspective, this was madness. Concert schedules were precisely calibrated, venues had strict curfews, and every minute of stage time had been choreographed to maximize the audience's experience. But Mercury understood something that transcended commercial considerations, something that elevated entertainment to the level of art and human connection. He understood that the greatest performance he could give was not another perfectly executed song, but this demonstration of genuine care for the people who had entrusted him with their evening, their money, and their emotional investment. As he spoke, something magical began to happen in that venue. The initial confusion and concern gave way to a profound sense of connection, not just between performer and audience, but among the audience members themselves. People began to look around them, really seeing their neighbors for perhaps the first time that evening. The crushing press at the front of the venue eased as people became more conscious of the space they occupied and the comfort of those around them. What had begun as a potential tragedy had transformed into a moment of collective awareness and mutual care, orchestrated by a performer who understood that his greatest power lay not in his voice or his theatrical presence, but in his ability to remind people of their shared humanity. When Mercury finally returned to the music, the energy in the venue had shifted completely. The crowd's enthusiasm had not diminished, but it had been tempered by a new sense of responsibility and connection. The performance that followed was electrifying, perhaps even more powerful than it would have been without the interruption, because it was built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine care. Every song carried an additional weight, every gesture additional meaning, because the audience had witnessed something authentic in their performer, something that went beyond the carefully crafted persona to reveal the extraordinary human being beneath. That night in 1978 became legendary, not for the technical perfection of the performance or the spectacle of the staging, but for a moment of humanity that revealed the true, character of one of rock's greatest icons. In an era when performers often seemed distant and untouchable, Mercury had shown himself to be profoundly connected to his audience, aware of their individual needs and willing to sacrifice his own agenda for their welfare. The story spread among fans, becoming part of the mythology that surrounded Queen, but more importantly, it established a standard for what live performance could and should be when approached with genuine love and respect for the audience. Years later, as Mercury's legend continued to grow and his influence on popular music became undeniable, that November evening would be remembered as one of the defining moments of his career. Not because of any song he sang or any particular display of vocal virtuosity, but because of what he chose not to sing, because of the minutes he gave up to ensure that every person in his audience felt seen, valued, and protected. It was a demonstration of the principle that true greatness lies not in the ability to command attention, but in the wisdom to use that attention responsibly, not in the power to move masses, but in the sensitivity to care for individuals. The incident revealed something fundamental about Mercury's approach to performance and to life itself. He understood that with great talent came great responsibility, that the privilege of commanding an audience's attention carried with it an obligation to their welfare. This was not a lesson he had learned from any textbook or manual on stagecraft, but something that arose from his own deep empathy. Under the blazing stage lights of a packed arena in 1978, 50,000 voices thundered through the darkness, their collective energy pulsing like a living heartbeat. The crowd stretched endlessly into the shadows, a sea of faces illuminated by the electric glow of anticipation. At center stage, a figure commanded this vast assembly with the presence of a king addressing his kingdom. Freddie Mercury, at 32 years of age, stood at the pinnacle of his powers, his voice soaring over the multitude like lightning splitting the night sky. Queen had conquered the world, and this concert promised to be another triumph in their legendary catalog. But what happened next would transform a simple rock concert into something far more profound, revealing the true measure of greatness that lived within this extraordinary performer. The atmosphere crackled with electricity as thousands of fans pressed forward, desperate to get closer to their idol. In the front rows, bodies compressed against metal barriers, the weight of 50,000 people creating a dangerous surge toward the stage. This was the era when rock concerts were wild, untamed experiences where safety often took a back seat to spectacle. Fans climbed over barriers, security struggled to maintain order, and performers typically powered through whatever chaos erupted below them. The show must go on, after all. Regardless of what happened in the crowd, this was simply how concerts worked in the late 70s, an accepted reality of rock and roll culture. But Freddie Mercury was not like other performers. Even as he belted out the opening numbers with his trademark theatrical flair, his eyes constantly swept across the audience. He read the crowd like a conductor reads an orchestra, sensing every shift in energy, every change in the collective mood. His connection to his audience went beyond mere performance. It was almost supernatural in its intensity. While other singers might focus on their notes, their choreography, or the technical aspects of their show, Freddie remained locked in communion with every single person in that arena. The crisis unfolded suddenly, as these situations always do. In the crush near the front barrier, a young fan found herself trapped in a human vice, the weight of bodies pressing against her from all directions. The more she struggled, the more trapped she became, her cries for help lost in the deafening roar of music and voices. Panic began to set in as breathing became difficult, the crowd unconsciously pushing harder against those at the very front. Security guards, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the audience, failed to notice the developing emergency. In the darkness beyond the stage lights, one person's distress seemed invisible against the backdrop of 50,000 celebrating fans. But not to Freddie Mercury. In the middle of a powerful vocal passage, his trained eyes caught the telltale signs of trouble in the front row. Years of performing had taught him to read body language, to distinguish between the joyous chaos of celebration and the desperate movements of someone in genuine distress. Without missing a beat in his song, he began moving toward that section of the stage, his performer's instincts guiding him even as his voice continued to soar over the crowd. Then, in a moment that would become legendary, Freddie Mercury did something that shocked 50,000 people into stunned silence. He stopped singing. Not gradually, not at the end of a verse, but immediately, mid-note, his voice cutting through the arena like a blade. The band, confused by this sudden deviation from their rehearsed performance, slowly ground to a halt, instruments fading one by one until an eerie quiet settled over the massive venue. 50,000 people, expecting to be entertained, instead found themselves witnessing something unprecedented. Freddie walked to the edge of the stage, his commanding presence somehow growing even larger in the sudden stillness. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the arena without amplification. Such was the absolute attention he commanded. He had seen what others had missed, recognized a human being in distress while everyone else was lost in the spectacle. This was not about showmanship or creating a memorable moment for his audience. This was about recognizing that behind every face in that crowd was a person deserving of protection and care. The fan who had been trapped looked up in amazement as thousands of people around her began to step back, creating space where moments before there had been crushing pressure. Security, now alerted to the situation, quickly moved in to ensure her safety. The entire rescue took less than 2 minutes, but in those moments, something profound had shifted in the arena. 50,000 people had just witnessed their idol demonstrate that human life mattered more than any performance, that no song was worth someone getting hurt. What happened next revealed the true mastery of Freddie Mercury as a performer and as a human being. Instead of awkwardly returning to the music as if nothing had happened, he seized this moment to create something beautiful. He began to speak to the crowd, not as a distant rock star addressing his fans, but as one person talking to 50,000 friends. He acknowledged what had just occurred, explaining that everyone deserved to enjoy the music safely, that each person in that arena mattered to him personally. The crowd's response was unlike anything veteran concert-goers had ever witnessed. Rather than frustration at the interruption, there was a wave of respect and admiration that seemed to physically ripple through the audience. These people had come expecting to see a great performer, but they were witnessing something far rarer, greatness of character displayed on the grandest possible stage. They understood that they were not just anonymous faces in a crowd to Freddie Mercury. They were individuals, each worthy of his attention and concern. When the music finally resumed, the energy in the arena had transformed into something electric and sacred. The band launched into their next song with renewed intensity, but it was Freddie's performance that truly ignited. He sang with a passion that seemed to pull emotion from the very air around him, his voice carrying new depth and power. Every gesture, every movement across the stage seemed infused with the connection he had just demonstrated with his audience. This was no longer just a concert, it had become a celebration of the bond between performer and audience, a recognition of their shared humanity. The crowd responded with an enthusiasm that bordered on religious fervor. They sang along louder than before, their voices joining Freddie's in harmonies that seemed to shake the very foundations of the arena. Security noticed that the pushing and shoving that typically characterized such events had largely ceased, replaced by a collective awareness of everyone's well-being. The audience had learned from their performer's example, understanding that truly great experiences required mutual respect and care. Song after song, Freddie delivered what many would later describe as the performance of his lifetime. His voice soared through the arena's acoustics with crystalline clarity, hitting notes that seemed impossible for any human throat to produce. His stage presence, always commanding, now possessed an intimacy that made even those in the furthest seats feel personally connected to him. He moved across the stage like a man possessed by the spirit of music itself, every gesture calculated to draw his audience deeper into the shared experience. But the magic of that night went beyond technical excellence or theatrical spectacle. In the brief moment when he stopped everything to help one person, Freddie Mercury had revealed something profound about what it truly means to be great. Greatness, he demonstrated, is not about elevating oneself above others, but about using one's platform and influence to lift others up. It is about recognizing that true power comes not from commanding attention, but from giving attention to those who need it most. As the concert reached its climactic finale, with 50,000 voices joining Freddie's in the anthemic choruses that would define a generation, something remarkable became clear. The audience was not just singing along with the music, they were participating in something larger than entertainment. They had become part of a community, united by the example of compassion and leadership they had witnessed. The performer on stage had shown them that caring for others was not weakness, but the ultimate expression of strength. The final notes of the last song echoed through the arena, but the audience seemed reluctant to let the moment end. Their applause continued for what felt like an eternity, but this was not the typical appreciation for a well-executed performance. This was gratitude for having witnessed something transformative, for being part of an experience that had changed their understanding of what it means to be truly great. As fans filed out of the arena that night, their conversations centered not on the technical brilliance of the music they had heard, though it had been exceptional. Instead, they talked about the moment when everything stopped, when a performer showed that he valued human life over spectacle. They spoke about feeling seen, individually recognized, despite being part of a massive crowd. They shared stories of how Freddie's eyes seemed to find them personally during the performance, how his message of care and protection had resonated in their hearts. The true measure of that night's impact became clear in the days and weeks that followed. Fans who had attended the concert began to change how they behaved at subsequent events, looking out for others around them, helping those who seemed overwhelmed or in distress. The example Freddie had set rippled outward, creating a culture of mutual care within the rock music community that had previously been known more for its wild abandon than its compassion. Music critics who reviewed the concert struggled to capture what they had witnessed. The technical aspects of the performance were certainly worth praising: Freddie's vocal range, the band's musical precision, the stagecraft that